terminology. I don't know what this is. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. And my name is Tom D'Agostino. Arlene Nicholson, my wife, and I, we are authors of now 18 books on ghost legends, haunts, paranormal. And I've been investigating for going on 43 years, and I'm 44 years old. And we've seen a lot, and we've seen a lot of nothing. Well, one of the most interesting things was 30 years ago is I read something, when I was a kid actually, I read something about a vampire grave in Rhode Island. But 30 years ago I started researching this and came up with a ton of places and a ton of stories and a ton of documented histories of New Englanders exercising their loved ones as vampires for over 100 years. So New England is actually the vampire capital of the world. And today I'm going to show you some cases and incidences, and you're going to be very surprised by what happened. Well, first of all, during this time, diseases were running rampant. You know, you had scarlet fever, yellow fever, this fever, that fever, disco fever, and no, it's not that one. But anyway, one of them was tuberculosis, and tuberculosis was called consumption. And the reason it's called consumption is because it would literally consume the body. The person would become pale, gaunt, white, corpse-like, they'd be coughing up blood, and obviously they'd be delirious from fevers. Well, what happened during that point is that they would see, if of course the family member died before them, they'd obviously probably see them and knowing that their fate is the same way, this horrible death. And there was no, in 1720, Benjamin Martin actually isolated the tuberculosis germ and said, it's this little teeny germ, we can probably work with it. And the whole medical field said, what are you like? What are you, nuts? And so it was totally thrown out, his findings. But people started becoming sick, and it is very contagious. Now, here's the funny thing about that, is that these people are, in the winter, they're sleeping on top of each other in bed, you know, they're passing food back and forth across the table, coughing at each other across the table, so what do you think's gonna happen? Oh yeah, they're passing it on like crazy. Whole families are being wiped out. Okay? Well, by and by, there's no cure for this, so what do the people turn to? Superstition and folklore. And in this superstition and folklore, they begin to call this evil thing that rises out of the grave at night, feeding on family members, a spectral ghoul. It was not a vampire body like, you know, Dracula, like, oh, blood. It was a ghost of the person in the grave that was reported to come out, feed on family members, and then go back to the grave and nourish the body. As long as it was whole and decomposing in the grave, its spirit would continue to rise and feed on the family members. So what did they do? Well, they had to find which one was a vampire. So this is what they used to do. Some of the beliefs. The spirit of the deceased rode and fed upon the lifeblood. Only on relatives, family members, for fear of being found out. The word vampire was never used. Again, it was a spectral ghoul. The word vampire, although it was in the Oxford Dictionary and in the Hartford Current in the 1700s, it still was not used because it was a whole different terminology back then. As long, the idea to cure this now is they say, okay, we've already lost 3 family members to this. We need to do something. So they work on superstition. They go to the graveyard. They dig up the bodies. They find which one looked like the most suspicious of a vampire, which means that it would probably look like it fed recently. There'd be blood at the mouth. But we already know some people. There was no embalming back then. So the natural decomposition took place, which means, yes, of course, through the natural decomposition, any blood in the lungs or in the heart would, or especially in the lungs, would come out of the mouth. So they're like, oh my God, the body's bloated, it just fed. Oh my God, there's blood on the lips, it just fed. They have their vampire, what are we gonna do? Well, first thing they would do is one of the early cures was go in and look for a vine growing across the coffins, and then if you cut that vine, it was supposed to stop this infliction. That didn't work. It worked in one case, but it didn't work by and by. So the next idea was another coming from European cultures. And what they did is they would remove the body, they would remove the heart and the liver, the lungs. They wouldn't necessarily burn the whole body, but they removed the heart, the liver, the lungs, and they burned them to ashes. And then they would feed those ashes to the sick. Yeah, so you're drinking your brother, sister, father, mother. I gotta think, if you didn't die from that, you probably would live to 200, right? Now, these superstitions were a mixture of all the different cultures coming to the country at the time. And there's another one that Voltaire, in 1744, the famous writer said, a vampire was a corpse that sucked blood from the living until they became pale, gaunt, contracted consumption in their weak state, and then they would die and in turn pass it on. And in that, all hell broke loose from there. The first documented vampire case that we have comes back to 1784 in Wellington, Connecticut. Isaac Johnson of Wellington, he had 2 children who died. And when another family member got sick, this foreign doctor, who he later referred to as a quack doctor, said, you must look for vines or sprouts growing from the bones, especially near the stomach here. If you see them, get rid of them. And it will stop. Well, they tried that, but the cure failed. Interestingly enough, the doctor was a Romanian doctor. And I have the newspaper article actually of him calling the doctor a quack from the Hopping Current. Kind of interesting. Now, the graves of the family cannot be found in the Old East Cemetery where they would belong because they later moved into Massachusetts, near Amherst area. And also, only 30% of any colonial graves in Connecticut are accounted for, according to Ruth Shepley, the Connecticut Grave Network, because a lot of them used wood as markers. In Dummerston, Vermont, Lieutenant Spaulding. This is very interesting because another thing to note is these people weren't ignorant or stupid. Some of these people were actually founders of towns, state legislatures, of acclaimed military heroes, college grads, but they had nowhere to turn. They had no other things, so they had to rely and hope and pray that their family would live through this superstition that all of a sudden became rampant in New England. In early 1793, around the same time the Burton case, which we'll get to in a second, several children died in rapid succession from 1782 to 1793. And you can see the ages, 20, 19, 16, until he himself was 59 in 1788. All his brother boys were large, very big stature like him, but they wasted away very quickly. He died under 40 years of age. Now, you can see where it says Leonard died, and then the twin brother of Timothy, John, died at age 27. They're not sure which one. It's in the history book of Manchester and in the history book of Dummerston in Vermont. Ian and Laurel, one of the 2 contracted consumption. And the townsfolk got together and they knew exorcism was necessary. So they took, and here's the thing, the strange belief of the vine growing across the coffin. They said, let's try that first. So they took Timothy, the last one, because he'd be the freshest one, because remember they pass it on, and they burned him. They burned his body. Cut the vine, burned the body. Well, guess what? The sister got over her disease and lived to an old age. And what did they say? It worked! This is great! We can do this all the time. Let's try it on the neighbors. Right? Oh, yeah. So this is a case where it worked, and of course, if it worked, everyone's going to talk about it, right? I mean, they got on their cell phones in 1793. Now, in 1793, not too far from Dummerston in Manchester, Vermont, Rachel Burton of Manchester died of consumption. Captain Isaac Burton, well, they had that mourning period, you wait like a year, and then you maybe go on. Well, he waited a month, and then he married Huldah. Well, yeah, that was her buddy, Huldah. Anyway, well, Huldah became ill, and now the townsfolk go, oh my God, it's Rachel coming back. She's sucking the love out of him. She's mad, she's jealous, and all this stuff. She's a vampire, and they believed she could be saved. We could save Huldah. So they dug up Rachel, and what did they do? Well, they cut out the heart, the liver, and lungs, and they set up a forge in the town square with Jacob Mead's forge, and Timothy Mead presided over the exorcism, and they cut out the heart, liver, and lungs, they burned them, and they fed them to Huldah. She consumed the remains with a good Keanu. And, well, 500 to 1,000 people turned out for this event. Yep. Yeah, you know, they were selling heart-shaped balloons, you know, or something. So it was kind of funny because that many people wanted to see this ritual or exorcism. Well, it didn't work because Huldah died on September 6, 1793. Now here's the signs they were looking for when they dug up. As I mentioned before already, the bloated body, the pale flesh, the fingernails, and here it appeared to be grown. Okay, that's not true, it's the skin receding, obviously. Blood at the mouth, which a corpse in little or no state of decay. You're going to find out in a second that this is pretty amusing for some of them they found when they exercised them. Jerking or gurgling when the organs were being removed. Well, you've got the body bloating because of decomposition, and if you puncture, it's like puncturing a balloon. Yeah, of course something's going to move. And of course, fresh blood in the heart or other organs. The heart is made of protein. It's natural to have blood coagulated in there after a person dies because that's the main organ of blood. And being the heart, being mostly protein, it takes years and years and years and years and years to decay. It was believed also that blacksmiths had magical powers because they had the knowledge of iron and fire, you know, and horseshoes and stuff. So parents would actually take their sick children to the blacksmiths many times, and they'd have them either hammer the inflicted part of the body, lightly hopefully, or they pass them over the forge, the burning forge. They were also known as blood charmers who could stop hemorrhages. I expect you could if you took someone's bleeding and just stuck their hand on a blacksmith's forge. Yeah, I mean, you know, 2,000 degrees, I expect it would stop anything. But so blacksmiths were actually thought to be magical people back then. In 1796, these are all recorded actually cases. That you can look them up. They're actually recorded. Stephen Staples goes to Cumberland, Rhode Island, the very first town council meeting, February 8, 1796. He goes to the town council meeting and addresses the magistrates, and he asks for permission to dig up his daughter, Abigail, who had died of consumption, to save his other daughter, Lavina Chase Staples, to perform experiments, as he put it. Well, here's what the council said. Duly consider resolved that the said Stephen Staples have liberty to dig up the body of Abigail deceased, and after trying the experiment, as aforesaid, that he bury the body, said Abigail, in a decent manner. So they said, yeah, go ahead, dig up your daughter, do what you need to do, whatever, who cares, right? Well, there's no record of what he actually did, but it probably was the exorcism that we're talking about, the heart, liver, lungs. And it really didn't work because Lavina died also. So they were born. This is the Cumberland number 17 cemetery. As you can see, these two go up to the 1860s. But mostly the field stones, because the families were dying so fast and so many sometimes, they could not procure regular headstones and footstones, and sometimes, in many cases, they couldn't even afford to, as you're going to see in the next case, because 6 of them died within 6 months. And you can see the field stones there, and they, to this day, that's what they are. In 1799, Stutley Tillinghast, Exeter apple farmer, supposedly had a dream that he lost half his orchard. It kind of bothered him. But he had 14 children, him and his wife Honor, and all of them lived to adulthood. Insanely rare at that time. Okay? So that was cool. They were in the Guinness Book of World Records. Anyway, this house, it's funny, she had 14 children, all survived. It actually says that on a stone. But what happened is Sarah, one of the oldest, contracted consumption and died. And one by one, the children started getting sick and complaining that Sarah was visiting them at night and touching parts of their body and causing great pain. Now, in this delirium, obviously, they had seen Sarah die a horrible death. So here they are, boom, 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 boom. being buried one by one within 6 months. And it's time, somebody said, we have to perform an exorcism. We're going to have to do this. Whoops. We're going to have to dig them up and see which one's causing it. So they dug up all of them, and then Sarah, when they dug her up, they found that her eyes were still blue, her hair was still blonde, her nails had grown, and she had blood on her mouth. That was a vampire. In order to save the 7th child, they performed an exorcism of the heart and the lungs, but the child died anyway. They said he was too far gone to save no matter what. So these people lost half their family or half their orchard. That's stuff they dreamed. In 1807, the very first issue of the Old County Memorial Advertiser, I actually have a copy of this, which is really cool, because it does tell this. 15 years ago, it happened to town, the person who died of consumption by some supernatural being nourished in the grave of some one living member of the family. And that during the life of this person, the body retained in the grave the fullness and freshness of life and health. This belief was strengthened by the circumstance that whole families frequently fell prey to this terrible disease. So now they're saying it, that yeah, he's going to, go in the grave and you're going to see this wonderful body who just ate your family. Of course, it ended up. 13 of the 14 children had died of the disease within a year. 13 of the 14 within a year, leaving one mother and one son. He took ill after the death of the 16-year-old sister. So the villagers decided to test an old superstition. They took up the remains and they turned her over in the coffin. Now, why would they do that? Do they know when you look at her face? No, because the belief was she, instead of digging her way up out, she'll get confused and dig deeper. Now, this is great. Listen, you got something that can rise from the dead, feed on people, and go back, and you're going to fool it by turning it upside down? Okay, but well, they did that, and when they exhumed it, they found it to be lit up with the brilliancy of youthful health. And within 2 weeks of the exorcism, the child died, and then the mother scarcely a year later. Now, Michael Bell wrote about this, and there's a poem this guy, the author writes this really cool poem, and in the end, Michael Bell, who's a famous folklorist, this was the name of his book, and this is where he got the name from. In the end, the last line of this guy's poem says, "The living was food for the dead." And it's no truer than that. I mean, Frederick Ransom wrote of his brother. Now, this was in Woodstock, Vermont. He wrote of his brother many years later, a Dartmouth College student dying in 1817 of consumption. And they had the body exhumed and burned in the town common, the little boat-shaped common, at Captain Pearson's blacksmith forge to try and kill the wife, who Mrs. Ransom. She died in 1821, the daughter in 1828, 1830, and 1832. Now you think, wow, that's a long time, right? But they still believe that this thing was in the family. Again, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people showed up. It was uncommon. He was 3 years old at the time, and he wrote about this, and it was published in the Journal of American Folklore. And the manuscript, which we've actually seen, resides in the Williams Public Library. We actually got a chance to copy this section of the manuscript, but it was cool. In 1827, Nancy Young became famous when she died of consumption. Okay? And here's the funny part about it. Anna Leon and Levi Young. This is right on the Rhode Island, Connecticut border in Foster. Right on the border. In fact, it's kind of funny because it's on private property. And lo and behold, one of my childhood friend's son buys the property. So we can go there anytime we want. Anyway, Levi Young was another celebrated military hero, very educated person, but this is in the Foster Town records. This is great. It seemed to be a curious idea prevailing at the time that by cremating or burning the remains of a departed friend or relative, while the relative stood around and inhaled the smoke, it would eradicate the disease. Well, as soon as Nancy died, Elmira became very ill, the sister. To one of the farm folk, oh my God, we had to jump up. I know. They dug up Nancy, they put her on a pyre, they lit the whole thing on fire, and the family stood around inhaling the smoke of her remains. Well, because of that, each one of them lived to be 110 years old. No. Well, there you go. She died at 17 years old, and then as you can see, a pile of them died. Although it was a 27-year span, they still believe that the cure did not work. Obviously, it didn't. But this was one case where they actually burying the body and standing around inhaling the smoke of a burning body. Yeah, no? And there's the graveyard, but now it doesn't look like that. It's all clear and clean because my friend's son and his wife went and cleaned it up. But there's something really cool about that. See those graves are tilted? They say when graves are tilted like that, that means that an evil spirit of the person who died in there rose and tilted the grave. The Corwin case, this one is another one. And incidentally, this case, we think was just written as a story. The basis of it is pretty cool because the names are from Rhode Island. Joseph Gallen and everything. And it was the same thing in Woodstock, that Woodstock Green. They actually burned the heart and then they buried it in a hole in the town green with a 7-ton slab of granite placed over it. And then they sprinkled bull's blood on it. The sickly brother was forced to drink some of the ashes mixed with the bull's blood. Well, there's no common graves in the Nathan Cushing Cemetery, but they would be buried. No one has ever found that slab, even though they dug up the Woodstock Green several times. And the gallops and everything, they were notable town figures. They're from Rhode Island. So someone said, you know what, somebody must have made this up because there's no documented proof of this that they could find. But there's one documented piece of proof, and that's this pretty cool grave right here. North Smithfield, Simon Whipple Aldrich died in 1841 of consumption. Tons of the rest of his family also, almost all of them died. But on this grave, we found it very interesting because, first of all, when he died, he was 27 years old. But look at this, his sisters died before him, after him, and everything. There's no record of him actually being exhumed or any one of the family members being exhumed for vampirism. Now don't forget, Rhode Island has 3,300 cemeteries alone. All right, most in the country, because they're all little private cemeteries. So now you have a family issue like this where they got a vampire, and they're going to go out to your family cemetery. Who's going to know? You have a 25-acre farm, right, or a 10-acre farm, and your cemetery's in a corner over there. Who's going to see you do this? You're not exactly going to go over your neighbor's house with teeth the next morning and go, yeah, I dug up that fire yeah, last night. Oh, horrible. Well, we burned the logs. You know, they're not going to be advertising it. So we're not sure if anything happened, but the really cool thing is we're counting on this stone. It says, although consumption vampire grasp has seized thy mortal frame. Then it says, ing mind, the stone was broken and fixed. Well, we found what the rest of it said. Although consumption vampire grasp has seized thy mortal frame, thy ardent and inspiring mind, untouched, remain the same. It's not original. It's not common, but it's not an original to that grade. That's a kind of a thing for artists and stuff we love. Now around this time too, which is kind of funny, we had Lord Byron, the writer Lord Byron. Remember, he was with Mary Shelley when she wrote Frankenstein and everything on a bed. He said, I'd rather die of consumption than anything. And it became an artist's disease. And it became a disease for the rich. It was a kind disease for the rich. In fact, the rich ladies used to paint their face white and their lips blood red and look like consumptive victims. Wasn't very good for the the farmers whose families were dying left and right of it. But they didn't care. And the lords and the masters of the house of the rich, they loved it because they had a time to put their affairs in order. Okay, I'm going to leave my wife 200 pounds. I'm going to leave my mistress the house, and that type of thing. So they could put their affairs in order. But it wasn't very good for either or any of them actually because of the horrific thing, circumstances that were going on. However, the Ray family in Jewish City, 1854. These are their graves. Lemuel died in 1845. The father, 49, Elisha, 51, and then Henry Ray in 1854 starts exhibiting signs of consumption. Well, they exhumed the brothers. They didn't exhume the father, probably out of respect. And they burned the brothers, the bodies, right on the spot. And then they reburied them. Then, of course, Henry Ray died anyway, and 3 of his children died from the same thing. Well, it's kind of funny because this is 1854 in May. And you had 5 newspapers show up. to do it, you know? Oh, what do you think? You know? And so there's been a whole bunch of newspapers, and one of them is North Courier. This is great because I'm going to go right to this part. So 2 years, not long ago, bodies of the two brothers already dead, decided to burn them. And for what reason do our readers imagine? Because the dead were supposed to feed upon the living, and that so long as the dead body in the grave remained in a state of decomposition, either wholly or in part, the surviving members of the family must continue to furnish the sustenance on which the dead body fed. Pretty cool, huh? Who wants one? Anyway, JB55, this is really cool. In 1990, there was a kid was sliding down the sandbanks in Griswold. And they're having a great time. They slide down the sandbanks. They run back up. They slide down the sandbanks. They run back up. They slide down the sandbanks. Two skulls follow them. What? Two skulls. They go running home screaming. And the cops come. They think maybe it's a burial ground for a serial killer. But then they call in for the people. They find no, this is an old forgotten burial ground. An old family burial ground. So they call in Nicholas Bellantoni, the archaeologist, and he goes in. And the first thing he does is they start digging up and get moving. Obviously, it's falling out of the side of the hill. Well, they find the first coffin they come across, they find it lined with granite slabs. I'm like, that's weird. They open it up, JD55 written in tacks on the coffin. They open it up, the bones are arranged in a skull and crossbone manner. In other words, somebody had removed the rib cage, took the two femur bones, put them like this, and put the skull there. Why? Well, they call in Michael Bell, his buddy, Michael Bell, the folklorist, the vampire also, and they find two other coffins, IB45 and NB13. Well, there was a suggestion that a ritual was done to save one of them, maybe. A vampire ritual. And, well, they figured out, yeah, maybe which one though, and when did this take place? So the ritual took several years after JB was buried because there was nothing left of him but bones, obviously, to do that. A few years ago, somebody decided to do DNA testing because those bones were sent, some of them were sent to Washington to test, and yes, he had died of consumption. You can see it. They did some DNA and they found out JB was John Barber. His son, Nathan Barber, died in 1826 from a newspaper article of consumption. So, they probably did this to save him. As opposed to written records and accounts, this is the only physical evidence of a vampire scare, something that actually can be seen and touched and prove it actually happened. Actual case, right there in front of their faces of it. Other than the writings and the accounts and the newspapers and all that. So this is pretty interesting. That's the Walton Cemetery where they relocated all the graves. It's kind of cool. They said, well, I go, well, where are they? And the guy goes, well, we can't tell you. It's like, we don't want people like digging them up and digging up vampires. I'm going, they're over there, aren't they? He goes, how do you know that? I said, because it's the only place in the cemetery there's no stones. And just dirt. There was the cures. Consumption can be cured. Yeah, you can do this if you read seaweed tonic and mandrake pills. So anyway, we got some over there if anyone wants to try it. Yeah, how do you think I keep my girlish figure? South Kingston, number 10. This is weird because this is the Rose family. In 1874, William Rose, according to the Providence Journal, went to the cemetery after his daughter died and dug up his daughter and performed an exorcism on her, even though nobody in the family was sick. He just wanted to make sure no one else would get sick. So he went and burned the hot little lungs, and it's kind of cool because that's them right there, but there's no Ruth Ellen Rose supposedly in the cemetery. But that's the little newspaper article you can see from there. And we found Phoebe Rose, who died at the same date, in Peacedale, but we did not find a Ruth Ellen Rose. And she's a lot older, you can see 48 years old. So who knows if this got mixed up. A lot of times when these things were happening, especially in places like Peacedale or anywhere, it's very sparsely settled and even more sparsely than you had people who would go around and take the death record and everything. And of course, you'd be obliged to give them a few bucks or something, or more than anything wrong. And of course, by the time this guy's going around all day taking death records, he's wasting out of his socks. He probably forgot to put in Phoebe, Ruth Ellen, Helen. What the heck is that? Oh, oh, I don't know, Johnson. And that's the name of the street he's on. So, you know, there's a lot of missed records and deeds being going on like that. And this was one of the dilemmas. So we did find a lot of it here. Booknotes, Sidney Ryder wrote a really cool thing on the vampires and the Tillinghast, and Booknotes, March 31st, 1888. I have a copy of it. Awesome. But this takes us to Mercy Brown. How many people know Mercy Brown? You don't look that old. In 1890, well, first of all, let's go back, Tom, back. 1880, 1888, I think it was 1883 and 1886, that's what it is. Mercy's sister and mother died of tuberculosis, salt consumption, okay? Her brother, Edwin Brown, becomes very ill, and he goes up to Colorado Springs, where they're treating consumption of tuberculosis now, because in 1883, Robin Koch actually isolated it in front of a panel of scientists. So, anyway, while he's going to Colorado Springs, Mercy Brown gets sick, dies in 3 months. I mean, they call it running consumption. And she dies on January 17, 1892. Well, you can't dig. The ground's frozen. So they put her in this keep, which also kept people. There was 3 things this keep would do. That, the ground's frozen, you can't dig. 2, if you died and you weren't sure if they were dead or whatever, they put them there, they put some food in a bell. And so you wake up, and I'm really not dead, I'm already have consumption, but I live. And you start ringing a bell. Well, over here, there were no houses really anywhere for a long time. They could ring the bell forever. And the other one was, because they did lock it also, because grave robbers, medical schools, they keep them in that keep for 3 to 4 days, because after that, it was considered, the body was considered useless to them. So, there's her in the keep. All of a sudden, they're like, uh-oh, we got this weird thing going on. Edwin comes back, he's really ill, Mercy died, one of your family's a vampire. George Brown is going, this is 1892. There's no such thing. It's tuberculosis. They're treating it 25 miles down the road in Providence and everything. He didn't want to hear it, but the neighbors are going, hey, look, if he dies, there's no one else left. They're coming after us. They really believed it. So he goes, okay, I'll tell you what. We'll perform an autopsy. He calls Howard Metcalf, Wakefield, the doctor. Metcalf goes over to Exeter, Rhode Island, and he gets there, and the locals have already dug up, this is in March, incidentally, March 19th. And so basically, the ground was thawed pretty much. They had already dug up Mercy's sister and mom, and they're all bones and stuff and left there. They've been dead almost 10 years. And they go into the crypt, and they pull Mercy out, and they open the coffin, and they're like, whoa! What's going on? She had moved in her coffin. Yeah, they're slinging the coffin out into the ground. Of course she's going to move. 1, 2, she was perfectly preserved. She died in what? January? And they stuck her in a freezer? Okay. And 3, there's blood on her lips. So they cut open the body, and they cut open the heart. And there's blood in the heart, and they had, whoa, she's a vampire. And that sounded like the Holy Grail, remember? Anyway, and so they cut out the heart, the liver, the lungs, they burn it on a rock, and they feed the ashes to Edwin with medicine, who dies a few months later. Well, this would be the very last known, written, documented exorcism of vampirism in New England, because at this time you have all kinds of modern amenities. You do have the automobile, you have radio stuff, you have electricity, you have people sending wired stories across. I found this story in a San Francisco newspaper. Okay? So I mean, wow, the whole world got a hold of it. What are those people over there doing? And, well, that will be the last one. Here's the commentary from Tucker Valley. Lena, this is the problem that I love this. Testing a horrible superstition in the town of Bethel. Bodies of dead relatives taken from their grave. And here's one. He says, feeds on the sister. Where is it? I don't know. And the ashes of the hot liver of a person afflicted, blah, blah, blah. The practice was 6 or 7 years ago in the same county. And it's like, brother eats sister's ashes and stuff like that. I mean, it was wild. They even had this, I believe in vampires. Around us, who are sure they do exist. Pretty cool, huh? They had an anti-vampire party. That would be the last known one. And over here, this one is just a mistaken vampire. This is where the people that became famous when Nellie Vaughan, I Am Waiting and Watching for You. Some legend trippers went there one night and found that. And a whole story blew up from it. Well, anyway, I Am Watching and Waiting for You is a common saying. It's a very religious saying. But when this happened, she died in 1889, and she wasn't a vampire. She's what they call a mistaken vampire. But the funny part about this is many more, as you can see here, in 1799, Loudon, New Hampshire, 1810, Bonstead, New Hampshire, the whole town got together and decided to do something to help the family. It wasn't even the family. The town went and dug up the Janie Dennett to save the father. Saco, Maine, yeah, a lot of that right there. We visited all these places, and you could see, man, oh my God. The number is probably far beyond what we can measure that happened. Yeah, the word vampire was in the Oxford Dictionary, 1734. It came to America, New England, in 1765. This is one thing that I did look up. I looked up the genealogy of all the families that were documented for vampire cases in Massachusetts, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Connecticut. And guess where they're all from? Rhode Island! Hey! So basically, Rhode Island's the vampire capital of the world. And I'm not talking about the state house of the At one point, it was called the White Plague. That's what they loved in 1828, Lord Byron did that. But there's one other thing. After Mercy Brown died, as you know, she was in Exeter, and it made world attention. When Bram Stoker died, they would go into his files, and they found Mercy Brown's case in it. He used Mercy Brown as the character Lucy Westenra in the book, and where does the book take place? Exeter. So he leaned heavily on the Mercy Brown case in order to make his book. Any questions? Comments? We have some red punch-ups. No. We did have a lot of the vampire books that we wrote on the history.